A good deal of my works, for a while it had been about the African diaspora. Next to that, it's always been about self-image and identity. Things from a certain perspective, I felt like some of the pieces do speak to the idea of having to present yourself in some form, or how you see yourself, or how the world sees you. I've sometimes done it more politically, more socio-political. Other times it's just more about who you are to yourself. Like when you don't have to present yourself to anyone, how do you view yourself? And it's from matter of fact, day in the life kind of a look to something that's a little more about how you actually do deal with yourself on a daily basis. Professionally, I am an artist and graphic designer. Graphics in the apparel industry. And I've been doing that for a while. Painting also, having shows. And so it's been a little mix of the two, you know, here and there. So daytime tends to be the graphic design and after hours, the painting end. I work in different mediums. It depends what the piece calls for, basically. I really don't have a limitation as far as the kind of medium that I use. In collaboration with FiveMyles Gallery. Came about from me actually walking into the gallery one Sunday just to see what was here, because a friend of mine who lives in Crown Heights had mentioned that there's this gallery. And so as I'm walking through, I met, there was a lady who started talking to me and, you know, telling me about the current artist and what kind of materials he uses, etc. Only to find out not so long afterward that she was the owner and director of the gallery. So she did ask if I was an artist, and I said, yes, I'm an artist. And she says, oh, you should send me something. And I said, well, I sent something last week. You know, and so she pulls out her computer and says, show me, you know, where is it, you know? And she sees my email and samples of my work, and she was really excited about it. And she said, you know, currently we're full booked as a calendar for the gallery, but I'll try to fit you in wherever I can to do things. And so I said, you know, that sounds cool, you know. First step to anything at a gallery is for them to be excited about your work. So I figured I'd be back anyway to see whatever was going on. So I get an email about a day later that said, you know, there's this idea I have, maybe you'll be interested in it, you know, come see me at the gallery. So I said, sure, you know, at the time, so I came over. And she takes me outside and says there's this green construction wall that is up, and she'd like to use that as a gallery wall to exhibit works. And it's going to be a new series that she's thinking of, you know, called Interlude. And I said, sure, that sounds great, because, you know, on one hand, it's another forum in which to show your work, and another, it's, you know, in collaboration with the gallery, so that's great for, you know, press, etc. And another part of it is it's in the community. So for me, that public art aspect as well was very intriguing to me, and I felt that would be a great way to showcase my work to a new audience, potentially, that otherwise might not see it. So that's how the wall outside came about at FiveMyles.
So when this big construction site started going up, about, I guess, last winter, everybody in the neighborhood became very upset because there was a lot of noise, a lot of dirt, a lot of disruption. Nobody was telling anybody what was happening. And before we knew it, they began building this green plywood wall that protects all these construction sites all over New York. And they're very ugly, and it's not exactly a nice aesthetic for New York City, but it's definitely the most common one these days because they're all over the place. And after a while, I thought, well, perhaps we should turn it into something positive. Why don't we just use it as an exhibition space for public art? It became clear that it was definitely possible, but we would have to get permission. And we started asking the owner of the site, and he said, oh no, the building department just passed a new law. You cannot put anything on these walls because it amounts to free advertising or illegal advertising, and it is not allowed, and we'll be fine. So we went to the building department, and of course the building department was totally inflexible and said, there's nothing we can do, we can only tell you the law. And we went back to the owner and we said, okay, if you give us permission, we'll try and fight it through in some other way. He gave us permission, but we have to check with him what we're putting up. If he gets a fine, we would pay it. So we accepted all the conditions, and we said, well, if we get a fine, we'll go to the judge and tell him this is art and a good idea. And the way it works for us, at any rate, these will be rotating exhibitions. The artist makes prints of their artwork. We enlarge them to a reasonable size, and then we laminate them so they're protected against the weather. And we begin making these exhibitions. Many different artists, actually, 4, 3, can have exhibitions on this wall. It worked beautifully. Francis obviously put the images of his paintings in a beautiful installation. Then we had Maura Sheehan make sun prints of local kids, and the way that works is put the kid's hand on it and let the sun take a photograph. And then next to it, we are in the process of really doing a wonderful installation of 2 sneaker collections by 2 local young men. And they have taken photographs of their sneakers, and we are in the process of really turning these enlarged and laminated photographs into an excellent formal exhibition. And everything that's up now, actually including Francis's exhibition, I will keep through September because it looks wonderful and people enjoy it. So people walk right up to these paintings, to everything that's on the wall, and take a look. And very sadly, I have to say that 2 of these large sun prints have been, I have to use the word stolen. They were very carefully taken down and are probably now enriching somebody's little apartment on the wall. And I hope not more of it is going to happen, because these are, on some level, art exhibitions. And as far as FiveMyles is concerned, nothing has ever been destroyed or vandalized or taken. And this is kind of a new development in the neighborhood, and I'm sad for it. But I'm excited to have these exhibitions happening. It's great for FiveMyles. We're looking at artists' work who would like to expose their work in this way, are willing to make these prints. And I think it's a really great experiment. And I wish the city would give permission for these green walls to be used as art exhibitions.
Most of the narrative for my pieces, it's the jump start. It's always going to be the jump start for the creative process. It's always, taking notes and things and all that. And sometimes the image makes me think of something specific, and that's what I want to depict. And it could have absolutely no relation to it, but it just sparks something that, what if I told the story this way instead of this way? And based on what I want to say about that, or some kind of relevance to me. That's how it fleshes out. Sometimes there are tweaks here and there, but for the most part, the narrative is always, the theme, etc., whatever it is, comes before, and I could always find things to kind of make it fit into what I want. Painting Kids is one of the ones I did for my first solo show back in '07, and it was inspired by the kids who were kidnapped and used as militia back in Africa, in different parts of Africa. And reading those stories where you see that, you know, a little kid being forced to carry a weapon and use it against someone else because these adults, you know, thought in some way that was a great idea, and then not keeping in mind the repercussions and keeping in mind the psychological trauma that these kids have to live with later on. And the painting basically juxtaposed two different ways that kids were being kids. And one was forward image, where basically the kids who are already in these militia and carrying guns and in some ways glorifying what they're doing, posing with the gun and everything. And behind that were just kids having fun, laughing, smiling, you know, a normal, usual day that has no trauma associated with it whatsoever. And I just wanted to show those two realities over each other to try to see that at the same time, two different kids are having two very different experiences as being kids. Actually, an image from another documentary that took place during Black History Month, but I think it focused on like parts of Brazil, and seeing as how there's a very big African contingent in Brazil. This image came about because it had to do with self-image also and how some view themselves, etc. But you go to this village and you just had these kids who are just being kids and playing around, and then you have this moment of this girl who just kind of commands your presence and just stands there with this look on her face, like, okay, what's going on next? You know, she can take hold of life at some point. And so that's why I made that, just as her energy and her presence and her attitude. Little Miss was also part of my first solo show. It was just showing this kid sort of somewhat embracing herself, but a lot of hers in the dark. And so it's just almost a tone, black tone, mid, like a raw umber tone on the wood, so it just gave it a form. And she had a scarf on her head. It was based on a photo that I saw in a magazine about Africa and displacement. And you had families that are going from war-torn areas and being put in camps of sorts where they have to survive in the meantime. And she happened to be one of the girls who was just commanding the front stage at some point, just kind of almost, she seemed as if she was just consoling herself in the moment. And I wanted to capture that image in that painting. The painting on the upper left with the yellow background, it's named Detroit Kid. It's a photo that the father took of his son. I felt like just the mood of the image spoke volumes, that it was just, it just brings you in, that I felt like that's what I wanted to capture about it. Historically, in Black American history, there was always the issue of the black doll in some parts of it, where the kid is shown a white doll and a black doll, and you're asked to, which one is the pretty one? And they would always pick the white one. And I felt that this time around, I should say that the black doll was the pretty one, and that you should want that black doll. And that kid holding that black doll cherishes that black doll. There's strength in that. There's truth in that. There's honesty in saying this is the one that I want. It might not be the popular one or the one everyone else thinks I should take, but this is the one I'm taking. And I love it. And I wanted that from almost the child's perspective to be of importance as part of their development and growth. Looking off is the girl with the little twist in her hair, with her Converse sneakers on, sitting on the curb looking off. It's like looking off for answers. Because I know the girl that I took the original photo of wasn't necessarily doing that. She was observing this whole festivity going on. But I felt that it could be, her body language could be used as a way of, in your stillness, you're looking for something. And you're looking off, you know, to this corner, thinking that something might reveal itself to you. And like a journey of life in a sense. So when you start, at that age, you start asking questions about life and about, you know, your surroundings and who you are and how you fit into life. Why I do a lot of portraits is to capture a moment in time, a very specific moment in time, so that it's about that person. You're having a very direct conversation with that image, which is what I want the audience to have with that image, is that very personal, where no one else exists anymore. It's just the two of you. Ileana, she's the sister of a coworker, or ex-coworker of mine. And she happened to come into work one day with this wrap on her head. And I thought, that's a painting that I'm looking at. Because I like anything that can depict the cultural beauty that's related to Africa in some form. It's something I would like to capture in some way or another. And I felt like just that is part of the culture. And I just told her, whatever you do, don't take that off. I'll be right back. And I got my phone and I took a couple of shots of her. And I told her, this is going to be a painting. I'm not sure she completely believed me at the time, but I honored that and made it into a painting. Lighten Up was a friend that I used for a series. Idea behind the painting is self-image, about how you see yourself. Like you look in the mirror, what do you see? And are you okay with what you see? And I remember her making a mention at some point that if she was lighter, maybe she would get more roles as an actress, because that was her thing. And I remember picking up on that and thinking, I read a lot about those struggles and know people who deal with struggles. Hell, I deal with struggles myself, but it's always, that painting was meant to capture the idea of someone that you see who's so beautiful and yet feels they need to alter themselves to fit into what they feel is where they will find success, because they can't find it just by being themselves. And the idea was to try to change your skin in some form to lighten up in order to be more acceptable. And I felt that would be a powerful story to sort of try to convey in some form or another. Looks like she's using white paint in some form to make herself whiter, where she thinks that's the way that she's going to be happy or successful in whatever it is she's doing, or accepted. Looking Through was one of the pieces from my last solo exhibit in Manhattan. Same one with Detroit Kid. Part of it was about boldness and attitude and being confident in that stare and that making eye contact and being aware in that sense. And I just wanted it to be just brassy, just, it's like, this is me right here, and I'm looking at you. Afropunk is a piece that I had taken at the Afropunk Festival about 5 years ago, probably. But it was of this punk rock band that was fronted by this black girl with a mohawk on her head, and I thought, so cool. You don't see that every day. And she had a Ramones tank top, I think, on. And I felt I liked some of the photos that I had taken. I thought this would be great as either illustrations or a painting. But I chose to do it on a painting on wood, because at some point I was working more on wood than on anything else. And I just thought it was such a awesome rock and roll attitude painting. Just happens to be with a black girl with a mohawk. And I thought that was cool. I've painted on wood. I started doing that mostly for my first solo show back in 2007. And the whole wall, all the walls were filled with paintings on wood. Because I wanted to, there was a certain earthiness that affords you, and the grain also adds a certain texture and character to whatever it is you put on it, that it's this interesting marriage between what you're putting on what's already designed in some form. And I like the way that it holds, and the way that there's a certain weight that it has when you do it on wood, and you allow the wood to show through. Daydreamer. That was my last completed piece this year. It's also made on wood, but it's following what I've been doing recently, at least as far as a year ago, for my last show in January 2014, where I want texture on the surface. So I use discarded newspapers or torn out pages from, discarded books, etc., and paste them on the ground first on the actual canvas or wood or whatever it is to give it texture, to give it, I want it to dry not perfectly, so it looks like you could actually touch it and feel something on there. And part of the idea of using texture or using those pieces was the idea of making something that you would not find useful anymore, but making it useful, almost like a recycling sense. But I was also using that as a base subject matter for the people that I was representing on those surfaces, who are, from a societal point of view, might not be viewed as important as other people, but shown that they are important and should have a voice and should be represented in some form or another. I like sharing my creation. I hope people get joy in some form out of it, or even engage out of it and ask questions and talk to other people about it, because ultimately that's what you want your work to foster in people, is dialogue, and that might lead to some kind of understanding or exposure to something else. And I keep asking questions, and I keep trying new experiments, and I keep trying to paint something else, so that I create another venue for that conversation to potentially happen and bring people together. I mean, what could be more fun than bringing diverse people together?